That was the last of my first extra virgin olive oil harvest being bottled. And this is First Press, Daniel Dawson Talks Olive Oil. Welcome back. I'm Daniel Dawson, recording on Friday, July 4th. On today's show, we critique the BBC's disappointing coverage of new research linking oleic acid and obesity. Then we take a quick look at some of the latest olive oil trade news. Finally, I'll be joined by Olive Oil Times senior writer Paolo De Andreis to discuss the latest Xylella fastidiosa outbreak in Italy. But we begin with the BBC Science Focus article entitled "Too Much of This Healthy Fat Could Be Adding to Your Waistline." The article discusses a recent study that found diets high in oleic acid to be associated with an increase in the number and size of fat cells that contribute to obesity. The BBC then goes on to mention that oleic acid is the predominant fat in olive oil, implying that consuming olive oil will lead to greater weight gain than consuming other fats. I'm a big fan of the BBC, especially the World Service, so it is very disappointing to see this misleading reporting. Now, I've read the study, and the researchers did not use olive oil. They based their findings on mice fed a high-fat diet enriched in oleic acid using coconut oil, peanut oil, milk, lard, and soybean oil. The researchers even go so far as to caveat that it is currently not possible to isolate a single fatty acid from a fat source. As a result, their findings cannot be translated to any particular food because virtually all dietary fat is made up of different types of fatty acids. While the researchers only mention olive oil one time in a key resources table at the bottom of the study, the BBC mentions it 6 times throughout the article. To their credit, they clarify that the message of the study is not to abandon olive oil, despite their second sentence implying that olive oil could make you fat, but to consume it in moderation. Adding my own clarification, no one will ever claim consuming unlimited olive oil will lead to weight loss. But instead, significant bodies of research demonstrate that replacing saturated fat with monounsaturated fat, such as oleic acid from olive oil, has been associated with weight loss and lower cardiovascular risk. Furthermore, there's plenty of research demonstrating that extra virgin olive oil rich in phenolic compounds has been associated with decreased parameters associated with oxidative stress and inflammation, both of which are underlying conditions for prediabetes and obesity. You don't need a PhD from an elite research university to understand that science is complicated, and boiling an entire study down to a clickbait headline does a disservice to the researchers and science education initiatives on the whole. A disappointing story from an otherwise very good news organization, in my opinion. Moving on. We've got news from Euroactiv that the European Free Trade Association, which includes Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, has signed a free trade agreement with the Mercosur, removing tariffs on agricultural products from its 4 members, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Argentine exporters are likely to welcome the deal, which will level the playing field for their brands to compete with European counterparts in these EFTA members, many of whom are wealthier countries and some of which are seeing olive oil consumption increase. Meanwhile, the Financial Times reports that European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen said a trade deal between the EU and US would be impossible to reach by the US deadline of July 9th. This means the current tariff rate of 10% could shoot up to 50%, which is undoubtedly causing concern among olive oil exporters. Now, I've been talking to exporters from around the olive oil world over the past few months, and they almost all tell me that prices will not go up for the current harvest. The current harvest finished in around February for the latest producers and earlier for others, and as a result they were able to get their products bottled and packaged and shipped to the United States before the tariffs came in. And olive oil hasn't been produced in the Northern Hemisphere since the start of the tariffs. While prices at origin for extra virgin olive oil have fallen dramatically in recent months, higher quality extra virgin olive oil prices are less closely aligned to these pricing trends. As a result, if a 10 or 50% tariff remains in place by the end of the next harvest, with the first oils being shipped from November to January, there could be price increases. Moving on, I'm pleased to welcome Olive Oil Times senior writer Paolo De Andreis back to the show to discuss the latest developments surrounding Xylella fastidiosa in Italy. The olive tree pathogen has killed millions of trees in the southern Italian region of Apulia, which is responsible for about half of Italian olive oil production. Hi, Paolo. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right. So as I mentioned, you've got a new article coming out in Olive Oil Times about four more Xylella fastidiosa infections identified in Puglia. Could you start by explaining where they were found and why this is causing concern?
Yeah, the thing is actually the concern comes from the fact that they are found in an area which is quite north of the Apulian region in southern Italy, more north than any other infection found until this moment. So that is cause of concern because it's north of Bari, which is a very important area for olive oil production in Puglia. Adding to that, researchers are now trying to understand how it got there, that infection, because the closest infection we know of is 60 kilometers from there, which means how did they actually spread to that? So there are two hypotheses. The first one is that some vector insect, like the spillbag, has got there through because it's on a motorway. Actually, what happened is the infection is close to a motorway. So what they suspect is that this spillbag has taken a ride on a truck and got there 60 kilometers from there, or even more than that. The other hypothesis, which is more trouble, a bit more worrisome actually, is that the infection is actually spreading there, but we still do not know that. And that can happen because monitoring the Xylella outbreak and how it spreads, it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Okay. Yeah, could you describe what that implies and what impact implementing the anti-Xylella protocol will have on that area?
Sure. Well, the first thing, of course, when they found was infected olive trees, we immediately, because these are the Italian regulations, which are just the same of the European regulations in these cases now. So when the infected tree is found around the infected trees in an area of 50 meters, that is declared as an infected area. So it is officially a red zone. In the 2.5 kilometers from there, there is a buffered zone where special monitoring operations will be carried out. But there is another area which is closer to the tree, 200 to 400 meters wide, in which immediate, very meticulous monitoring operations will be conducted not only on the olive trees, but all those kind of plants that can actually host the bacteria. So there are many different kind of plants that can actually do that. So they will try to map the infection. Of course, they hope that it's only limited to that very specific area, but it's never been like that until now. So we don't know if that is true. We still don't know. And so that is why it is worrisome. That is how what is happening now.
Okay. Xylella was first introduced, they estimate in around 2008 that it was introduced from a Costa Rican coffee plant, which might have been an ornamental tree being brought to someone's house, which I mean just gives you a little bit about one of the unintended consequences of globalization is you could have an entire country's olive oil production cut in half almost just by
Right.
the introduction of that. And since then, I mean, it's spread throughout southern Puglia. And then is the concern that it will just continue to spread farther north? And it was mentioned in your article that the Barletta Andria Trani province is responsible for about half of Apulia's olive oil production, which in turn Apulia is responsible for about half of Italy's olive oil production. So is that an immediate concern, and what do farmers believe needs to be done?
Well, yes, of course, there is a concern. What we have seen through the years, because as you said, this infection goes on since a long time ago now, we have seen that prevention measures trying to hinder the population of vector insects actually have an effect in slowing down the infection, but they did not stop that. So what actually happens now is that there will be trying to clean up the area as much as possible. But of course, the fact that it has been found so up north it is actually menacing the olive oil output throughout the whole region now because it means that it's going north and it's not been stopped. There is no cure for Xylella. We know that. There is no way to cure it. And we also know that these bacterial insects, they feed on the xylem of the olive tree. And once they do that, once they become infected for the whole life, which can last even 1 year. So during that year, they will infect all the plants they get into. So you can see how complicated it is to stop the infection. And that is why it's very worrisome. Because, of course, being close to a motorway, the most probable cause has been the ride on a truck by some vector insect. That will be the least worrisome option in this situation, because if that is true, maybe the infection is limited. Of course, there is a lot of worrying going on at this moment.
Yeah, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. So that if it was one insect that came on the back of a truck and was just left at that rest area where they found the trees, then that's likely just to be an isolated incident. They'll be able to implement the protocol and it won't result in a broader spread. I guess that part of the concern is that it just comes a few months after they found another olive tree located in Bari in an area that was thought to be Xylella free. So I guess the concern is if you have many of these isolated instances, they could combine to the start of a more systematic spread.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why the people are very worried there is because we have developed a lot of technologies and procedures to detect Xylella now on olive trees and other plants, but it's always very difficult. Monitoring operations are routinely conducted throughout the whole region. And of course, after this previous infection found 60 kilometers from where this new infection was found, also was a very Xylella-free area until the day before that, because no aerial drone, no sample have induced people, the researchers, to think that there was an infection going there. So it's just one day, you never know what happens. So now what they are doing is trying to track how these infections got there. And yes, it is possible, but we don't know that is already spreading around. Yes.
Okay. And then, aside from the plant health aspect of this, you also have quite a big economic impact from Xylella fastidiosa. I've seen figures that say that it causes about 5.5 billion euros of damage per annum annually in Europe, and that's a result of a lot of things. It's a result of lost olives from the harvest, less olive oil to sell. It's a result of lost wages for workers who are not hired to harvest. And is that part of the concern? And then what are authorities doing in that part of Italy to mitigate the impact?
Sure. Well, what they tried to do in the latest years, I would say after many years of uncertainties on how to better act, they're actually pouring money into the areas where Xylella hit the most. The problem is, of course, that money is never enough and it will not cover the lost income for a lot of farmers there. So what is actually happening is whereas Xylella eat the olive trees in Puglia, like in Salento, in the Salento area, many are replacing the old olive crops with new kind of crops. And that is also worrying because, of course, the whole region can change its nature as in agriculture. So there is a lot of work done there to try to actually replace the old Xylella heat groves with new olive trees that are resilient to Xylella, because that is actually the best news we have on this subject. There are olive trees and there is a growing number of cultivars that are actually resilient to the bacteria. They will not be completely exempt from the bacteria, but they can survive and actually prosper if well managed with the bacteria. And there are a lot of experiments now that are trying to find out other cultivars that might have the same resilience. So that is very important because there are a lot of new projects, and now there is finally a large round table at the national level where all stakeholders, researchers, universities, and regional and national institutions converge. They're also trying to find out how to actually trigger a new olive plantation moment in Puglia with the new cultivars, with new resilient, Xylella resilient cultivars. So that is probably the best news we have about Xylella, is that there are some kind of olive trees that can actually resist.
Okay. Yeah, no, I've heard of the efforts to plant the
Well, favolosa, yes.
fabuloso.
FS17, yes. Favolosa, yes. Also called favolosa, yeah.
Okay.
FS17, Leccino, Lecce del Corno. And there is also an interesting cultivar, which is Lechana, because Lechana is a breeding program of Spanish and Italian researchers. And Lechana is also good for super intensive groves, actually. So someone is also thinking about that because it's resilient to Xylella and it can actually be used to produce large quantities of olive oil. So we will see what happens.
Okay. And then, so I imagine then another concern will be surrounding olive oils with a protected designation of origin or a protected geographical indication, because with Coratina being the dominant variety in Apulia, I imagine that replacing all of these historic groves that were full of Coratina, Parenzana, and Olearola will with these new Lecciana, Leccino, Favoloso plants will change the organoleptic profiles of the olive oils. Is that something that people are thinking about?
It will change those, but I think we are a bit ahead of time because actually, when we talk about they're planning this, they're actually still planning this. So you're right, this is a real concern, but it is true that Italy is a bit slow in reacting to Xylella. Now things start to move a bit faster, but it's been a long 10 dozen years now. So it's they really need to make it easier and faster to replace those crops. So yes, of course, the area where the last infection occurred is really in the middle of the Bari area. And Bari is Terra di Bari is a denomination, geographical denomination, very important for the region. Should that infection spread, we don't know about the consequences, but they will be huge economically and culturally too. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, already Xylella has left a huge cultural footprint, it feels like, in Italy, taking it from historically the second largest olive oil producer in the world, and then that combined with some other factors over the past 10 years, and it's frequently it produces less than Greece every so often. Turkey and Tunisia frequently produce more than Italy, and so it's had a profound impact.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. So you see the numbers are frightening, of course. Also, you have to add that Xylella is insisting on an area of the country which is already subject to climate change impacts. Because apart from other pathogens like fungi that seem to be involved in the syndrome that actually kills the trees, there is climate change there. There is an ongoing desertification. There is heat waves and very prolonged heat waves and drought. So it's a really complex situation there. So probably irrigation and modern techniques are the only answer if we want to preserve some real Apulian olive oil production in those areas. It's not easy. It's really a big task there.
Yeah, no, indeed. The combination of all of those factors, you get the convergence of Xylella with climate change. I know maybe not the last harvest, but in the previous harvest, there'd been some extreme weather events that lowered the production in Apulia. So it's really Yeah, I think I've been talking to lots of people recently, and there needs to be kind of a technological revolution in the olive oil world to increase efficiency of irrigation and implementing phytosanitary measures. And it sounds to me that Puglia could be ground zero for all of that.
Absolutely, they are really talking about this because see, the ministry now is having this round table on Xylella, but they also have other several round tables on other aspects of olive oil farming and production. And really, there is one that is focused on this technology, and because irrigation, as you said, is and science also tells us it will be more and more important to produce olive oil and quality olive oil too. So that is something that really need to reason. And yes, Puglia might be actually a good way to restart would be to implement all of those technologies and resources there. Yeah, it would be very very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep tabs on that, and we'll be in touch again to find out the latest about what's going on in Puglia. So thank you for joining me today, Paolo. I appreciate you taking the time as always, and I look forward to the article being published. Probably not today since it's the 4th of July in the United States, but next week for sure.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. Thank
All
you.
right. Always a pleasure, Paolo. As always, it's great to talk to Paolo, who does a fantastic job covering Italy and the rest of the olive oil world for Olive Oil Times. I'm sure we'll be seeing him again soon. A quick housekeeping note before we go, I would appreciate if you could like and subscribe to this video if you're enjoying the content. By liking and subscribing, you help inject more reliable information about olive oil into the YouTube algorithm and fight back against the pervasive and profit-driven misinformation on the platform. Thanks as always for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.